The confrontation. The cellar door groaned, a slab of rotted oak surrendering to the physical force Sarah exerted against it. They spilled out into the servants' corridor, a cramped, subterranean throat of the house that smelled of wet slate and decades of accumulated rot. Rachel stumbled, her knees buckling. The world wasn't merely dark, it was a cacophony of sensory information. Her hearing, once limited to the mundane, now captured the rhythmic thrum-thrum-thrum of a server rack 3 floors up and the skittering of termites in the floorboards. It was a suffocating layer of noise that made her teeth ache. "Stay with me," Sarah hissed, her voice vibrating with a metallic edge Rachel hadn't heard before. Sarah gripped Rachel's shoulder, her fingers leaving faint indentations in the fabric of Rachel's shredded sweater. Sarah's eyes were glowing with a faint, bioluminescent amber, scanning the shadows. She wasn't just looking, she was tasting the air. The drones. They're tracking the heat signatures. We need to stay low, but not just physically. As if summoned by the thought, a high-pitched whine pierced the air. A drone, a sleek, insectoid thing of brushed black steel and lens light, whirred down the corridor. Its central eye rotated, bathing the walls in a harsh, cold blue strobe. Rachel's instinct was to run, but the predatory shift in her blood took over. She felt a phantom sensation, like black ink spilling beneath her skin. She didn't run, she receded. She pressed herself against the peeling wallpaper, and for a heartbeat, her form blurred, her presence bleeding into the architecture. The drone swept over them, its sensor passing through the space where Rachel stood. It registered nothing but static. Sarah, however, didn't hide. She stood perfectly still, her heartbeat, which Rachel could hear ticking like a grandfather clock, suddenly slowing to an imperceptible crawl. She was becoming a statue, a void in the room's thermal profile. The drone hovered, its rotors twitching, before drifting further down the hall. "It's not just senses," Sarah whispered, her jaw tight. "It's control. If we let our heartbeats spike, the cameras will flag us. If we give in to the hunger, the cameras will smell the chemical change in our sweat." Rachel exhaled, a ragged sound that felt like sandpaper against her throat. "My skin feels like it's burning. Everything is so loud, Sarah. I can hear the blood moving through your veins. It sounds like a river." Sarah's eyes flickered toward Rachel's neck, a momentary, ravenous hunger passing over her face before she ruthlessly suppressed it. She winced, shielding her own mouth with a trembling hand. "Don't. Focus on the geometry of the house. Ignore the biological noise. Treat it like a map." They moved as one, ghosting through the manor's bowels. The transition had stripped away the last vestiges of their teenage innocence, replacing it with a cold, terrifying efficiency. Every step was calculated. They avoided the moonlight pooling on the floorboards, keeping to the absolute pitch of the shadows. A flicker of motion ahead, a secondary drone patrolling the staircase landing, forced them into a cramped alcove. Rachel pressed her palm to the stone wall, and the shadows obeyed, coalescing around her like a living shroud. She could feel the manor's history, the centuries of cruelty baked into the mortar, and she was using it to cloak them. "We need to get to the library," Sarah muttered, her voice barely a thought. "The blueprints. Thorne isn't just killing us, he's archiving us. He's broadcasting our agony to the world. If we can reach the junction box for the transmitter, we can blind him." "And then what?" Rachel whispered, her eyes shifting into a predator's slit pupils. "He killed Mark. He killed Jack. He's the architect, Sarah. If we don't kill him, we're just animals waiting for the next cage." "First, we survive the hall," Sarah replied. They moved out from the alcove, sliding like liquid through the architecture. The manor seemed to resist them, floorboards groaned in protest, and the dust hanging in the air seemed to swirl with malevolent intent. Suddenly, the hallway opened into a wider gallery adorned with moldering portraits. A drone, larger, armed with a blinding spotlight, rounded the corner. It caught them instantly in its glare. The machine let out a digitized screech, a signal meant to alert the other sentinels in the house. "Run!" Sarah screamed, but Rachel didn't move. Instead, Rachel reached out. She didn't use her hands. She reached with that dark, burgeoning power. The shadows in the corners of the ceiling surged forward like a tidal wave of ink. They wrapped around the drone, crushing its delicate rotors and shielding sensors with a violent, snapping force. The machine hit the floor, sparks showering the carpet. But the noise had been enough. "They're coming," Rachel said, her voice dropping into a register that sounded like grinding stone. "I can smell them. The remaining guards. They're not machines." "Then we stop playing prey," Sarah said. She stood in the center of the hall, her posture shifting from that of a terrified girl to something predatory and lethal. She flexed her fingers, the nails lengthening into translucent, obsidian talons. "We show them exactly what Thorne has turned us into." They stood side by side in the strobe-lit wreckage of the hallway, two monsters birthed from tragedy, waiting for the hunters to become the hunted. The house pulsed around them, a beating, living thing, but for the first time, Rachel didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a storm waiting to be unleashed. "Whatever is in these walls," Rachel whispered, looking down the dark corridor toward the heart of the manor, "it's going to learn to fear us." The mahogany door to the study stood before them, a heavy, silent barrier draped in the scent of aged parchment and ozone. Rachel reached for the brass handle, her fingers trembling, not with fear, but with a humming, electric vibration that had taken up residence beneath her skin. Beside her, Sarah leaned against the wainscoting, her eyes darting toward the rafters as if she could see the heat signatures of the remaining traps through the solid oak. "Wait," Sarah whispered, her voice a jagged edge. "Do you hear that?" Rachel stilled. At first, there was only the suffocating silence of the manor, then the low-frequency drone of the electronic equipment inside the room. But beneath that, there was something else. A rhythmic, wet scraping sound. Like a tongue dragging across bone. They pushed the door open. The study was bathed in the harsh, flicker-strobe blue of a dozen computer monitors, casting David Thorne's silhouette against the wall like a giant, distorted spider. He sat behind a sprawling desk littered with forbidden grimoires and digital recording hardware. He didn't turn. He seemed to be listening to a recording, the sound of a girl screaming. "The transformation is a messy business, isn't it?" Thorne mused, his voice smooth, devoid of any surprise. "The way the nerves protest when they are rewired for eternal night." He stood up, turning to face them. He was still wearing the tweed blazer, still playing the part of the eccentric historian, but the shadows in the room seemed to bend toward him, bowing to his presence. "I expected you minutes ago," Thorne continued, gesturing to the screens. "The feed is still live. My audience is quite impatient to see if the experiment actually produced predators, or merely broken toys." Rachel didn't speak. She felt a cold, oily sensation in her chest, a tether stretching from her heart toward the dark corners of the room. She looked at the shadows, and for a split second, they didn't just move, they reached. A black tendril, thin as a thread, coiled around her wrist, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. "You're a parasite, David," Sarah said, stepping forward. Her movements were unervingly fluid, her pragmatic mind already cataloging the exit routes, the placement of the servers, and the singular, exposed jugular of the man standing before her. "I am an architect," Thorne countered, his eyes glowing with a faint, hellish amber. He raised a hand, and the heavy drapes of the room slammed shut, sealing them in. "And you too are the foundation stones for a new, glorious reality. You think the hunger is a curse? It is a leash. And I hold the other end." He snapped his fingers. From the hidden panels behind the bookcases, the wall opened. It wasn't just a room, it was a cathedral of wrought. At the center stood a pedestal, and upon it, a shimmering, prismatic tear in the air, a gateway. Standing before it, bound in glowing, ethereal shackles, was Lyra. She looked up, her face gaunt, her white hair matted with blood. When her eyes found Rachel's, The connection wasn't just visual, it was a psychic collision. Run, child, the voice echoed directly into Rachel's mind, bypassing the ears. Not away from this room, into the power. He has tethered the gateway to your very marrow. Lyra, Rachel breathed, her voice dropping an octave, resonating with an unnatural, predatory depth. She is the anchor, Thorne said, circling the desk. Without her, the ritual would have burned you to ash. Without your bloodline, she would have been nothing more than a relic. Together, we are going to invite the void back into the world, and you will be the ones to usher it in. Sarah surged forward, faster than human eyes could track. She aimed a killing blow at Thorne's throat, but as her hand neared him, it struck an invisible barrier of dense, static energy. She was thrown backward, crashing into a bookcase and sending leather-bound tomes flying. Thorne laughed, a dry, rattling sound. Did you really think the student could best the teacher so soon? David turned toward Rachel with an amused smile. So cute. He began forcing Rachel to dance. Then Rachel saw a hand reaching out toward her. She froze. It was Mark. For a moment, she thought she had killed him. Her eyes widened as she stared at him. Mark smiled and held out his hand. Come on. Dance with me. Rachel slowly took his hand. They began to dance. Mark leaned closer and whispered, I told you. He moved. Good. Rachel looked at him, still trying to understand what had happened. David watched them from across the room. Good, he said with a dark smile. Very good.